What's poppin'? What's cracking? What's going on? What's up? I've been putting off this video for a minute. Basically, I want to talk about why I'm an atheist. Now, I want to do a little quick thing. I'm going to break it into kind of two parts, maybe three parts. First part, just starting point, becoming an atheist in the first place. Used to be a Christian, not a specific denomination, just a Christian like regular black people are Christians. Just whatever church was nearby, that's your religion. Experience now as an adult, and I'll generally, maybe I might go over some of my I'll go over how I feel about the concept in general, and then maybe I'll just quickly brush over my reaction to a couple of arguments for God I don't know, and I think they're unconvincing. I don't necessarily know that the arguments for God are the most important thing, but I'll get to that. Notice I'm talking pretty quickly. That's gonna happen the entire time. I'm gonna be talking pretty fast the entire time. If it feels like I'm talking too fast, you can probably, maybe slow down the video, I guess. This is kind of just the pace that I think, because this is kind of, I'm going over a lot of information. There's a lot I need to get out pretty quickly to not make this super long video. I'm already a minute anyway. All right, so we're just gonna get to it. So first, as a 14-year-old child, that's when I think I became an atheist for the first time, right? When I would say solidly that I am an atheist. I almost specifically remember being at some computer, looking at some article describing basically fine-tuning, and not being convinced at that. I'm like, I don't know if that really makes sense. Like, isn't the all magnificence of the earth, doesn't it it almost intuitively makes you think that some loving creator had to do that? I'm like, it doesn't do that for me. Before that, there were a couple of interesting things. Generally, I remember as a young boy, I remember having questions with pastors saying, you're all gonna burn in hell, all of you are gonna burn in hell, suffer, blah, 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 blah. He just put on for good, maybe 5-ish minutes, which felt like a lot longer when I was 10 at the time. 5 minutes about how horrible hell is and how you're all gonna suffer, and then for 15 seconds, unless you accept Jesus in your heart. All the kids were crying at this point. I don't remember if I was crying. I may have been. I remember being really upset that this was the way he decided to try and bring us closer to deism. At this point, I've still found religion or Christianity reasonably convincing. Faith-headed and Jacob was just like, why is this the way to do it? You're going to go to hell unless you do this. It was always weird for me, because at different churches I'd been to, it's like, God loves you, Jesus loves you, all this good things and whatnot. And you can get all the good things as long as you follow these tenets and be a good person, which you already kind of want to be. You already do these things, all these great feelings you have. You help people, do unto others as you do yourself, all that good stuff. So all the positive things. And at this church, this guy had a very different idea. He also wasn't from the church. He was from New York section of the church, was like a higher ranking. So I guess that's how they do it in New York. In New York, they're like, nah, we don't got time for that lovey-dovey mess. Anyway, later on in points, I've just, questioning the way that guy interacted with the church, which is different than everybody else did. I just started having some more questions. That guy's conversation with hell was the most negative experience I ever had with church. Other than that, it was just a boring place you had to go on Sundays. And sometimes we went to a white church that my grandma went to on my dad's side, and sometimes we went to a black church that my mom went to from my grandma's side on my side, whatever. That was it. But eventually I started having questions. There was expectations of certain behaviors that I would ask questions as to why. I know one thing that was the most interesting point, which I think flipped a switch to making me being really, really curious, was I asked my mom, what does the Trinity mean? It's like, okay, I get Jesus is a dude. Cool, whatever. God's creator of everything and whatnot. Jesus is like his little avatar. Like, if you play video games, he's the third person character that you get to play as for some reason. And I guess fair enough, we'll just not dig too deeply into that. What is the Holy Spirit, though? How is that in any way different from God? What does that mean? And every characteristic that she described of it, it seemed like she would either just all those characteristics seem to be just those characteristics of God. What makes it necessary? Where is God that the Holy Spirit isn't also the same thing at the same time? If God's omniscient and omnipresent, why is that separated into a third thing? What's the point of that? Now, I think that's a pretty unnecessary thing. It's not that big of a deal. I don't even care enough about it now. To me, it has no bearing on the truthfulness of religion right now. But I remember the answer I received was, I don't know, there's some things we're not meant to know. At that point, that was really inconvincing. I'm like, why would you be not meant to know something that I'm supposed to believe is true? Like, I'm supposed to think something's true, but to know. Now, this wasn't like the church saying this to me. This wasn't like this. My mom just didn't have an answer. And she said whatever she could say that I guess felt best for her. Because, you know, she was still learning. She's still a student of the Bible and of Christianity to this very day. And she'll likely be doing it until the very end of her days. And later on in points, as an atheist, I would help her try and understand, figure out different parts of the Bible based on the best of my understanding. Just like, I had never been anti-religion, just like, I just don't agree with it. After that question, I would ask, more questions. Like, okay, well, at that point, my family believed that evolution wasn't true. And I was in school, and I was learning how the concept of mutations worked in general, how cell replication worked, how evolutions worked, and evolution being the changes in the population over time, over successive generations, right? Because hopefully you guys understand what evolution is without having to straw man it, being like, I've never seen a monkey turn into a dog or whatnot. It's like, sure, cool, Kent Hovind fans, whatever. But next point, where was I? I was learning about evolution. So again, I know there are Christians that do believe that evolution is the case, and the family that I'd come from hadn't believed it was the case. So for me, like, as a child, the 14-year-old going through these learnings, like, each new thing I've been learning about science, evolution just being one example, would bring me further from believing, like, oh, I guess all this isn't true. Because again, I thought that the New Testament and Old Testament were supposed to be both true. Learning about how radiometric dating worked. Not just carbon dating, guys. I'll get into that later, but radiometric dating and how you can map the date and age of certain rocks or, just minerals or whatnot, or, different elements and shit, just based on the half-life of the radioactive isotopes. Doing that, where I'm like, okay, well, it seems like the Earth's existed longer than the 6,000 years that people seem to think existed. I also had questions of, like, how old, like, based on these times, it was, how old did these people live to? I asked my family, of course, at the time, and I'm like, yeah, Noah or not Noah, I don't know which people, but people lived more than 200 or 300 years. And at that, I'm like, that doesn't seem reasonable. I'm like, how did they live for that long? I mean, the most recent documents we have of most people, this seems to be the longest life expectancy that's ever been. It seems weird to assume them, like, okay, so people were just living for a really long time, and then they just stopped. It was like, we're only religious people living for a really long time? People didn't stop being Christian. Why did only certain Christians live for, like, 800 years? Actually, didn't Noah have to live for, like, that? It seemed unreasonable. I don't know, an interesting example is, like, based on the stories and timelines from, like, King Arthur, he'd have to be, like, 150 years old to have done all the things at all the right times and whatnot. And, like, it seems to map really well with just, like, it seemed to grow, the story of Christianity seemed to be a lot more similar to different religions and myths. And of course, I looked at all other religions as basically mythology at this point. Each question I asked is just like, oh, okay, that doesn't really make sense. And then it's like, how do I know that this thing is true, right? How do I verify that that dude was 800 years old? I don't have any evidence to suggest that anyone lived that long besides it says it in this book. And I think at this point, again, after all these questions I had, I'm like, yeah, I don't think I believe any of this at any point. Couldn't understand how, like like the parts of the Christianity are kind of all like the story. None of the stories seem to be significant enough for me to believe anything being true, or also not understanding how prayer could work. Like, doesn't seem like prayer does anything. For one, in my own personal experience, I'd be like, okay, not in my own personal experience, seeing other people's personal experience, I'm like, okay, you also have all been praying for all these things your entire life, and it never happens. I'm like, oh, okay, well, at least for you guys, prayer didn't do anything. It's like, oh, but sometimes this does happen. I'm like, yeah, but also sometimes good things happen that you didn't pray for. And sometimes God's just looking out for it. Seems like if God wants to do something for you, God's going to do it. It doesn't matter if you pray, but you're told to pray. It just seems unreasonable. Okay, I think that's most of the childhood experience. That's what I thought as a child. I did this as fast as I reasonably could go over everything. Like, that's as much as I need to go into how I thought as a 14, I get more like 10 through 16-year-old. Now I'm 25 though. Now the experience is more like, been going through life having family members who were Christian and are Christian. I don't know how much my siblings are, but, some friends who are Christian in college, a good some of my friends who are Christian, they're so secular that it doesn't impact. Like if I ask them, it's like, yeah, maybe, and they're like, oh, really? And then they just trying to move on. It's like they don't want to deal with the topic. They just like to not, that it seems like most of my peers that were Christian, not Christian, that were soft Christians is what I'll call it, just like didn't like the idea of not existing after, like had family members that died, and like it'd be nice if they went to a nice place. That seemed reasonable enough for me. I never argued with anybody about it. Didn't seem worth it. A lot of close friends are religious. I'm like, oh, cool. That's it. That's it. Hey, ain't nothing new to me. You could believe many things. Things I got more upset with disagreements were like, flat earther stuff, or like, vaccine conspiracy stuff. There's a lot of things that people disagree with that I'm a type of guy that likes to correct people. Less so now, but as a teenager, it came up a lot. So like, they call me Mr. Actually, because anytime someone said something factually incorrect, based on my knowledge at the time, or based on my assumptions of the knowledge at the time, I had to correct it. I would automatically say, if that's not true, this means this. Or if someone says something, I'm like, oh, I don't, and they disagree with me. I'm like, cool, let's Google it. We looked it up, and then maybe whether they're wrong or right. I would almost, no one would ever get away with just saying something that should have to be verified. That was kind of thing about me. Except when it came to Christianity, I would just let that slide with absolutely everybody. All the time. I'm just like, unless you'd say something, when someone mentions something about, medicine, disease, viruses, or whatnot, or something that, and then I would say something and then say, they'd use the Bible as their reference to suggest otherwise, I just stopped talking about it. I'm like, I'm not going to agree with them. I wouldn't be like, oh, okay, no, I didn't think of it that way. I would say like, oh, but it says this in the Bible. I'm like, okay, we just move on. Older, less time with my family, I was much, more around atheist as an adult, but nobody who cared, because we're just in college, and it's like, whatever. People are more less likely to have to go to church on Sunday, so you don't really care to think about it, and you're more likely to run into somebody who's already more of an outspoken atheist and be like, yeah, that's dumb. I'm like, yeah, that is dumb. I don't want to have to not drink and be a hoe. Like, I do get when Christians are saying like, you just want to be a heathen. I think a lot of people do. That's real as shit. I can't hold you. A lot of people want to be a heathen. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I didn't party. All my college experience was I would go to school. I would go to the gym. I would go to the gym. I would maybe do some homework. I would go to work. I'd go to my actual job. I'd hang out with my friends. We'd play some video games. I wasn't the most loyal of partners. But that happened after a good series of time. Like, my atheism had never had anything to do with wanting to do bad things. Like, the things that I did as a Christian did not change. My priority, helping people, has always been my biggest priority, and it'll always be that. I just like helping people. Now that the difference is the motivation is, I know that there's a reaction that happens in my brain whenever I help somebody, for some reason that keeps making me do it, and I don't fight it, I don't resist it. I'm like, cool, we like helping people. Regardless, even if the influence of that was from, I just think it's because my parents always like to help people. It bit them in the ass, but they seem to still do it. I do it, and now try and just avoid the being bit in the ass prevention of it. But then, it doesn't change. Like, that hasn't changed with being an atheist. Like, I don't want to sin based on your understanding of sin. Like, I've had a lot of conversations about, homosexuality and whatnot. I'm straight. I'm straight as a. I want to say something really messed up, but I'm not. Still straight. I'm not considering trying the temptation of some sultry love. Okay, I'm gonna stop. But I'm not, nothing's changing about the way that I'm interacting with life as a result of being an atheist, which I think is interesting. It's just how I understand what is and isn't true. This also could come from the understanding that there are Christians that held very liberal thoughts. Most of the liberal political positions and social positions I generally hold, the reasons for it are going to be different. So before you get mad, because they're like, oh, you think this? I'm like, shut the fuck up. We'll talk about that later. I curse a lot. I've always done that. I was cursing as a Christian. I'm cursing now. That's what's going to happen. But let's talk about why I'm unconvinced. I don't think the concept of God makes sense based on the ones that like the concept of the Christian God. I don't think that makes sense. The infinite thing is kind of difficult, right? Like, I don't know that an infinite being would ever do anything, right? Like, infinite that is effectively everything and nothing, I guess. It just randomly decided in the middle of infinity / in the never of infinity that it's actually going to just create humanity. Even if it was this 1,000-year time period, but even though, I don't believe it was that time period. Why would it doesn't seem reasonable to suggest that it would interrupt infinity to do something for a limited time. It would create limited time periods. That as a premise just seems completely unreasonable. I don't know how I don't even know how to have a conversation with anybody to just why someone would ever do, why an infinite being would ever have an action. Like, when someone talks about the ontological argument, or is it teleological? William Lane Craig, whenever he mentions he has to be spaceless, timeless, personal, for some reason he always throws in personal because he made an action, and he kind of just rushes over the personal parts when he's talking to more secular crowds, and when he's talking to more religious crowds he tells you about the personal things. And basically anything that William Lane Craig is in awe of, it's like, isn't that just basically something in awe? And then he just kind of bakes in, like, that's why it's personal God or whatnot. The Index has really shitty understandings of how infinites worked, and all the people he quotes, not all, a lot of the people that he quotes talking about beginnings and infinite and how infinite regressions or work, they disagree with him, especially the secular scientists. They all disagree with him. He'll quote them and he's like, that's not what we meant. That's not what that even says. If you read it, it's not what it says. When I talk about infinites, my main thing is you exist for. I had a conversation with my brother who, I'm not gonna spill the beans. Generally, I was saying, I'm like, if you think this being is infinite, it's hard to imagine he can care about anything. Like, from a human perspective, like, which is we can't really map on a human perspective because we're not infinite. But the more time that something exists, or the more something that exists, the less individual value each of it has, right? I'd care if I had 10 viewers on this video. Each one of those viewers makes up 1/10 of my entire view, and each one of them matters so significantly. But if you have 1 million viewers, each one of you individually is worth so much less of the percentage of the whole, right? Just how percentages work. But like, I can't, it's like not even possible for me to care so much about them so much, or I can care only so much care can, 1/millionth of care can go to each individual and spread out, right? Now, your interesting argument is like, well, God's got infinite ability to care. He's got infinite ability to love. He's got infinite attention. He's got infinite, he's basically got infinite cores and infinite RAM to run the programming of caring and loving all beings or whatnot. But it doesn't seem like it makes sense to why, though, because he'd have to design himself with care, right? Well, he had to decide that he's going to make beings that he's going to care about, which only really makes sense when you try and map on that human perspective of it. Like when I just said, like, okay, well, I wouldn't care if I had infinite of anything. I'd care about each thing. Like, the more of it existed, I don't care about every molecule of air that I breathe. But until there's a limit of it, until I personally have a limit of it, doesn't matter. Like, it's inconsequential. Like, okay, but that's only a human way of thinking. Okay, but you'd have to apply a human way of thinking. Like, I would decide to start caring or want to create another being. Like, why would God want to create a being? It just seems unreasonable. I mean, people are going to, if you're going to quote scripture, it's going to be unnecessary. Like, I don't care. I don't care what is said in the Bible until someone gives me reason to believe that the Bible is something that I should care about. I'm just like, well, there is a bunch of reasons to believe. I'm like, okay, but yours is one of many books that one that suggests that has some reason or value. My issue is, that's not a cop, that's a security ad. My issue is an infinite being seems to have infinite reason not to care as much as an infinite reason to care, right? Why do anything? It's so strange to fathom. I don't know if this guy's stopping for me. No, he's not. It's so strange to fathom if you were going on I can't think, there's no situation that you can really work a human experience into, because you'll never do anything for infinite periods of time. That's just not how human entity works, right? But we'll move on from that very specific point. We talk about the beginning of the universe. I should have mentioned this one earlier in the video. A reason to believe that the universe had a beginning? No, we don't. We had a reason to believe that the universe had an expansion 13.8 billion years ago, with a hypothesis, right? So you guys look at it, it's just a theory, right? Everyone likes to say evolution is just a theory, but willing to agree with theists who use the Big Bang in their favor. The Big Bang is the expansion of the universe. It's not the beginning of the universe. We don't know what happened, if what happened can even make sense as a question, but 13.8 billion years ago is the approximation of when the Big Bang expanded. Not exploded, expanded, right? So all the energy that existed within the universe was already there. All that energy existed in a very dense, very, very dense state. And for anyone who's like, well, how do I create matter? And matter is effectively just energy in a different state. Energy can become matter, matter can become energy. I'm not going to go into science lessons for you guys. But again, the universe, we don't have evidence to say the universe had a beginning. The expansion had a specific time point. We don't know what was before that. We don't know if before that can make sense. When we talk about time, before and after, we're only talking about space-time, which happens within the universe. We don't know what happens, what can happen inside the universe. People talk about randomness of the universe. I also think that's stupid. We're on the arguments for the, God phase. Talk about randomness. It was like, oh, well, you think everything just happened randomly? Two things. That's weird to use as like an argument against something. Like, if I flipped a coin and it landed on a specific side, it's like, wow, you think that happened randomly? I'm like, if it was the case, sure. I mean, even if it did happen randomly, like, does that change the nature of me not knowing? Actually, no. If a coin happens to fall somewhere and randomly, and I don't know how it gets there, it's like, oh, this coin's happened. It's like, oh, you think this coin just appeared out of nowhere magically? I'm like, if I didn't have any understanding of how matter and physics worked, like, I don't know to say that isn't the case. People say, like, the most annoying thing is universes coming out of existence. Like, how come universes can come into and out of existence? Rationally Debunked had a really good video with, I forgot the dude he collabed with, talking about the rules of, like, why don't we ever see anything else pop in and out of existence? For one, here's the thing, like, what your question is, why don't we see anything pop in and out of existence within the confined universe? Like, my thing is, like, I don't know what the rules for outside of the universe. We do know what the rules are within the universe, right? Generally, except for on the quantum scale, right? I don't know quantum physics, and you probably don't. You wouldn't be watching my video if you knew quantum physics. You're not. You're not wasting 21 minutes on this bullshit. But with outside of a universe, before a universe, after a universe, you don't know what the rules are either. The only example you ever had of a universe is this one. So you don't have a reason to believe that it's more likely that a God would create this, because you don't have non-God created universes or non-God created non-universes or God created non-universe. You don't have anything to compare it to. You're just in this universe. If you were in a just one room with no doors, no exits, you couldn't posit, like, if you'd been there your entire life. All the information that existed in there is all you have to work with. You couldn't make any claims about what was outside of that room because you've never gotten any information about how outside of that room works, what the rules are outside of that room. Say gravity functions normally in that room. Like, there's one floor, one panel, which you go up and down from there. You cannot float from that area. You don't have reason to believe that outside of that room the rules work the exact same way because you've never been outside that room. Not just that, you don't have any way to calculate what takes place outside of that room. There's no information for you. You simply don't have the information to make that claim. I just really dislike when I see people making claims about, look, things don't just pop in and out of the universe out of random. So it doesn't seem like the universe can pop in and out of random. But the universe isn't popping into existence within the universe, right? It'd be popping into existence outside of the universe, or maybe has always existed. Like, the suggestion that infinite realities is impossible, like, they're all impossible. Oh geez, it's like they all seem impossible. Universe existing forever seems completely ridiculous. Universe not existing and then starting existing seems completely ridiculous. A disembodied mind existing forever is as ridiculous as the universe as ridiculous as the bounce theory, right? Where the universe keeps expanding and collapsing and coming back forever. Like, infinity is ridiculous all the time. Like, we can't fathom it. We can't contemplate it. We also don't have any reason to believe that outside of a universe that those rules need to make sense the way that you have things make sense within a universe. I got really passionate about that. Probably unnecessary. It's just, I don't like people making claims about things that we don't have information to make those claims about, right? Like if I'm watching a video and someone's talking about something, the thing you hear me say the most frequently is, you don't know that, right? You can't know that, or you don't know that. Like, I mean, even on the less significant things. Like, there's a phrase in the Bible that something that atheists have their hearts hardened or whatnot. There's some shit like that. Like you're choosing not, but no, that they do believe and they're choosing not to or pretending not to or whatnot. But you can't know that. You don't know what's happening in my head. You don't know what's happening in anybody's head. You don't even know if their minds are even real, right? When we talk about certain philosophical concepts, and there's certain presuppositions that we have to make. I was talking with somebody, Nate, which was really interesting, and I think we have very different understandings of what, like, we have very similar understandings of how the science works, because we both think science works, right? But he's a Christian, I'm not. He doesn't seem to think that a couple of things that a lot of other Christians think, and I don't, that based on his explanation, I don't seem to behave the way that a lot of other atheists think. So we're not, no, but neither of us are the stereotypes. Shout out to you, Nate. I lost my train of thought. No, I'm gonna get it. One sec. Presuppositions. Okay, that took me a second. So like, we're talking about certain assumptions we have. There are certain things we have to assume to function in society, and like generally, like we go to the I think therefore I am one, right? You have to assume that you do actually exist. Kind of, well, you have to behave as if you actually, we'll get to that. You have to assume that other minds do also exist in a similar way that yours do. At least people are. They're not just NPCs walking around. Otherwise, it'll lead to negative consequences. The thing is, you can choose not to act and behave that way. Good luck functioning that way. I gave another example. Like, I have to assume that the ground isn't going to just cave in on me. Like, if I'm just walking down the street, that the ground is just going to simply cease to function. This ground just crumble and it'll just fall and break. Otherwise, I'll never be able to walk or go anywhere, right? I can't check. I have to assume that my car doesn't have a bomb strapped under it right now. That'd be a great time to do like an explosion noise, right? But I have to assume a lot of things to function, is what the assumption is. But I kind of countered and said, like, well, no, you don't actually have to assume any of those things. You have to behave as if that's the case to accomplish other things, right? Like, if I want to go to my car from my house, I have to behave as if the ground works. So I have to walk on the ground, presuming that it does work. I don't have to assume or believe that it will continue to be a ground. I can have no position on it, walk to my car, continue to not fall into the center of the earth. Once I get to my car, I'd be like, seems to have been the case that the ground, in fact, did ground the entire time. And I kind of extrapolate that to a lot of things. Like, I don't make assumptions about most things. I make decisions based on what is, if I want to accomplish this, what things do I have to do? I don't assume that the things that I have to, I don't assume that everything that's going to work will work. I behave as if those things work. And it reminds me of, what's his name? Jordan Peterson talked to Sam Harris a while ago, and he said he behaves as if God is real. I think it was a really good example. Now he just believes God is real, I'm pretty sure. And he probably did. He might have back then, but I think it's definitely a safer answer when talking to a smart atheist, because you're going to run into a lot of interesting questions that you could, like, well, again, I don't say that it is true, I just behave as if it's true, and there's a lot of use for that. Okay, let me not go into my Jordan Peterson thing. But I don't use a lot of the presuppositions that a lot of people have to use anyway. But because I don't do that, I don't fall into some of the same traps. I'm like, okay, well, you're assuming this, I'm assuming that. I'm like, I'm not. Like, being an atheist is just kind of just a description of how I think and behave. It's not like it's not my identity. You might view it as an identity because of how integral Christianity might be to you. Like, to all the people who don't care about religion in any facet, like, they don't even know whether I am or I'm not an atheist. Like, because who cares? It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with my general life. On the internet, however, I'm going to see a thing that's like, hey, I disagree with that, and talk about it. So, as right now. You'll see on this channel, there's going to be a bunch of other non-religious stuff that pops up, because, I mean, it's whatever. We'll talk about the watchmaker argument. I'll just go through the arguments just rapid fire. It is like you go on a beach and you see a watch, right? It was like, okay, that's not a watchmaker, that's the design argument, right? You see something that seems a watch on the beach, you're gonna assume someone designed to kind of, I don't know which version of that. There's also some randomness argument. There's like some other version where, like, you break a watch, break all the pieces apart, or take the pieces apart, or literally smash it and break it. They can't shake the bag together and have it randomly come back into a watch. Both of the examples, I think, it was a really fucking dumb, because I see a watch on the beach. If I saw a watch on the beach and I'd never seen a watch before, I'd never known what involved in a watch, I don't have any reason to, like, believe that beaches don't just come with watches. right? Someone, was it Matt Dillahunty? Someone gave an example of, if you're saying God created the universe, then that means everything's designed. Then it would be more like going to a beach made of watches, picking up a random one and being like, wow, this one's designed. Because in the watch, in that example, all the sand molecules, sand molecules, atoms, whatever, those are all also designed. So it doesn't reasonably make sense to be like, well, I know that this is designed. It's like, because you're comparing against things that are either all designed or none of which are designed. I mean, you might have a version of a God that you described that only made certain things. I'm not talking to you. Get out of here. Leave. Now, for the randomest one, I'm like, yeah, like, sure, like, but when we're talking about watches also in general, like, we only know what watches are because we have recorded history of watches being created and made. I can see someone make a watch. I can watch videos explaining how watches are made. I can read the books from some of the first watchmakers, right? We have evidence of the watchmakers. We know people did it. But if no people ever did it, like, we don't know, like, maybe aliens dropped watches off on the beach had we not ever seen anyone ever make it. Like, we don't have, you can't make all these assumptions. Like, you're using analogies that has baked in assumptions, and you're removing that part of the assumption to try and bolster the analogy. The other one about the shaking rock, I don't know what the goal of that is. I think that's to suggest that how did the Big Bang create the universe? Because a lot of people have this notion that it's God had to start life. I talked to a friend of mine who's just like, no, it seems like God had to have done something. And I'm like, why? So, well, life is just, it just had to have been. Like, this guy's a bad example because he hadn't really thought of it in that deeply. And I've got ADD, so I think about everything really deeply. But it doesn't really matter. Like, this is not the only thing that I'm this passionate about. We can talk about the most random things. You want to see somebody still get real passionate? Have me talk about basketball statistics and, pair comparisons. I'll get much worse than this. But it's not his fault. But I was asking, like, why do you think God had to be involved in that? What about life forming do you think God has to be involved in? And if he had done some more research, he could be like, well, abiogenesis and how if he watched, is it not Turek? There's a dude that someone did a video where he does some research involved in the field, and there's a lot of people who are Christians, at least, are convinced that you can't create, that we don't know how to create life. We do know how to create all the parts that create life. We can do multiple of the individual steps that are involved in creating life, like, or we can recreate them. We can create or at least use a bacteria cell and basically put things together to make the bacteria function as a normal bacteria cell would, right? And that's like, humans are bacteria, obviously, but bacteria come from some original eukaryotic cell, right? The science stuff is a little annoying for this because the science isn't the real reason most people are atheists. It is the reason I'm an atheist for the most part. Like, the science doesn't map up with what the claims are. The point was, like, people seem to think, God had to do it. Some people think aliens had to do it. I don't necessarily know that that's the case. I don't know. It doesn't seem reasonable to assume that over billions of years, 4.5 billions of years, conditions couldn't be the case that life could form just naturally, right? I could do a whole nother video where I explain all of the proposed theories for how life first formed. We're not doing that here right now. But I don't even seem going to get this far. Geez, I said it's not everything. What else is there? What other arguments do I care to enter? Oh, speaking of William Lane Craig, I'm not so little credibility after the whole I lower the standard for evidence thing, which I don't blame him that much for saying that. It's true, he probably does lower the standard for things involving that prove Christianity, but like, he really shouldn't have said that, because now the atheists are never going to believe him again. I was never going to believe him anyway, but he probably would have had some respect. He gained some respect when he talked to Cosmic Skeptic, and I think he lost all of it after this. But Cosmic Skeptic had great conversations about the I'm going to call it the William Lane Craig argument. But, if the universe began to exist, then the universe had a cause. The universe did begin to exist. It did have a cause. We already talked about this earlier. The universe, we don't have any reason to believe the universe did begin to exist, or we don't have any way to confirm that it did begin to exist or had not existed. We just don't have that information. So that kind of just wraps up that. And even if it did, we don't know if universes can come into existence uncaused. Maybe they can do that. We don't have any reason to know that. Also, you're really far from baking it. You have to do a lot of work to bake in a God into that. You have to, again, we talked about this. People probably believe this. Again, we don't have a reason to believe that the universe had a beginning, so I'm not going to, until someone suggests otherwise. I don't know why I should care about that argument. Is there any other arguments for God that I should care about? Design, fine-tuning. Oh, fine-tuning stuff like of the universe. I don't usually posit the multiverse as a resistance to fine-tuning argument. I just be like, I just go back to the comparison thing. Like, no, this one kind of requires a different thing. The fine-tuning, like the universe had so many certain sets of ways, and it had any parameter be any different, then the universe couldn't exist or we can exist. Yeah, cool. I don't know why that makes me think a God should exist. Like, that doesn't ensure a God made the universe a specific way. Like, when I'm talking about a lot of things, like, I always say the universe happens to exist a certain way, or we happen to exist a certain way. Like, we happen to be here. So it's like, oh, it's random. Like, you could use, people use the word random and something happened to have taken place interchangeably, but they use random loadedly, as if to try and diminish the likelihood of it happening because there are so many other possibilities. I think that's dumb, but again, like, we happen to be here. But like, people use the puddle argument. I know a lot of people get annoyed from hearing the puddle argument, but I think it's really strange. If you get a really simple version of the fine-tuning argument, then a simple puddle argument is pretty fair. Again, Rationally Debunked does a great video about the fine-tuning argument. Pretty much every single argument about God, watch Rationally Debunked's video. Pretty much have similar opinions with him. Now, again, we're gonna be like, oh, you just copy all of his opinions. No, I already have those opinions. He happens to have similar, more mapped out versions of it. Yes, like, much like I'm pretty sure any Christians who would, no one's gonna be here at this point, but any Christians will be here. It's like, you don't just agree with every pastor that's ever talked to you. I imagine, like, you're not. Well, you probably do agree with a lot of pastors, but it's not because they said that you now think it. Like, you probably had at least some inclination. Maybe they're just better at explaining it. And in both of our cases, like, well, if they're better at explaining it, maybe go hear them talk about it, and we can come back and argue afterwards. We're at 37 minutes. I guess we're done. I rambled a lot. This was a lot. This was not like many of my other videos. Well, this is kind of like my objective morality videos. It's just kind of random energy. I'm probably not gonna do stuff like this. I'm not gonna do it in a car. It's gonna be edited after this. I just want to get this one out of the way. I'm just to kind of springboard anyone's, like, me being an atheist or whatnot. I don't know if I'm gonna care to have to talk about this ever again, about anything. Oh well, if you like what you saw, leave a like, do a crime. Just kidding, don't do a crime. I'm out.